everyone. We are Geeks Not Nerds. I'm Admiral Logan.
And I'm Dan.
And today, Dan, we're going to do something that you could call slightly morbid.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to talk about death. Well, we're not going to talk about death. I'm going to give you a kind of desert island situation, and we're going to make a list, because Dan and I love our list videos, don't we, Dan?
Yeah, they're a lot of fun, and I think it reveals a lot of personal information about the person when you're picking your...
Oh, good!
Yeah, favorite things. At least it should, anyway. Like, you gotta like these things for some reason, right?
I just love the way you put that. It was like, at some point, just keep watching. You might get Admiral Logan's credit card number. It reveals personal information.
My favorite album is My Social Security number.
My favorite album is 555. So anyway, the question today is, and you folks as always feel free to put your lists in the comments. We'd love to see those. Today's question is, if you knew for sure, because most of us, of course, don't, when you were going to be shuffling off the mortal coil, and you knew that you had 24 hours to live, what would be the last thing in various forms of media that you would want to make sure you got to consume? And I didn't say this to you, Dan, when I pitched this idea to you, but I was sort of thinking when I came up with it, like, that you would want to consume for the last time. But you could certainly pick things, I guess, that you'd never seen before, because you're like, well, that would be the time to finally do that thing. But then wouldn't it be awful if it sucked? Like if you're like, there's a thing that people have been telling me forever I should watch, and you finally watch it, and you're like, well, God, I could have watched, Citizen Kane or Richard Donner's Superman or,
That's right.
One More Time. This is a thing that I think about frequently, and I especially did when I was younger, where I would watch something that I love or read something that I love that I'd consumed 50, 75 times before, and think, what if this is the last time? Mm-hmm. And I think all of us do that,
if you were to make
to some
a time
degree.
capsule, but for a person right before they die. You give them this cardboard box, and it's the things that they would want.
Yeah, and like, what would you want in your... What would you want to leave with? What would you want to be in your head? Like, because, of course, the things that you consume influence you and help define the person you are, and, who do you want to be? What do you want to be thinking about? That sort of thing. And I came up with a couple of different directions to take this when I was writing mine, Dan, and I ended up not going the direction I almost did. Because at first, obviously, and this is kind of where I ended up. At first, I was like, well, I would pick things that are just like, some of my favorite things that I want to make sure that I get to do one more time. But I also kind of thought about picking things that were kind of about mortality.
I did sort of the same thing with mine. I adjusted some of my choices to sort of fit that theme, I suppose.
Yeah, I thought of that a little bit, and I ended up getting away from it. Like, for instance, for movie, I almost picked Bruce Almighty.
Oh, interesting.
Because I was thinking, like I would be contemplating death. It might be a good idea, because I was thinking, well, you don't want to obviously pick the things that you love the most, but then it's like, well, I've seen, Batman 89 like 200 times. Maybe I would want to pick something that would be like, that would help me think positively about my situation.
Yeah, that's true.
I kind of thought of that. And then ultimately what I ended up doing is I put myself more in the headspace of, if this was really happening to me. Mm-hmm. And I started thinking, I have 24 hours to live. What is really the first thing I would run to the shelf and get? And I blanked out my mind, and I went, what would be the movie that I would put in if I knew I only had 24 hours to live? And I just wrote that down. And my answers got more interesting because I did it that way.
That's interesting. Yeah, I tried to sort of do a greatest hits of things that I like, too.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily pick my favorite movie or television episode or comic book of all time, necessarily.
Neither did I.
But I tried to get a mix of, like, a flavor of everything that I think defines my taste in entertainment, I suppose, and try to fit all those things in there before I went, I guess. Because, like, I could pick, a superhero movie, a superhero comic book, a superhero video game, a superhero novel, a superhero episode of television, and a album of a superhero movie score that I really like, and that would sort of be redundant. So not that I would have picked that anyway, but just as an example, I guess.
Yeah, and I wasn't thinking specifically superhero or science fiction or any other genre that I love. Just you're right, but this is just kind of reflective of us as people. You just heard Dan go down the list of what each of the mediums are, and so we'll go ahead and start with movies. And Dan, the movie I chose, and again, the first thing that came to mind, I ended up picking the Lego Movie.
Oh, cool! That's awesome.
And I think a lot of that is because I'm thinking like I want to kind of feel like a kid again, and not all of these are like kid things, but like that's a movie that I like how I feel when I watch that movie, and it's a movie that speaks to me on a lot of levels, and one of the most important things to me throughout my life has been imagination and creativity, and being an independently thinking person that doesn't have to conform to whatever like the standard status quo is, and that's what that movie is all about. And then like meta textual stuff always gets me, and it's got some of that, and also I picked it practically because even though I talk it up all the time and it's one of my favorite things now, I've probably only watched it like 3 times.
Oh, wow.
So I was thinking if this happened to me tomorrow, that would be the thing I would run to, because I haven't watched it enough times.
Yeah, that's right. So you could have maybe even a new experience on it, because it's probably one of those movies that you see something else in every time you watch it, if there's a lot of meta textual stuff.
That, and there's a lot of visual detail. You're bound to notice stuff that you've never noticed before. Yeah. Dan, what movie did you choose?
Well, I kind of went in the complete opposite direction, I suppose.
You went for wrist slitting 24 hours before you were.
Well, I love American history, and I kind of cheated on this one because I was between 2 novels. 2 of my favorite novels of all time are Heart of Darkness and 1984, and I chose Apocalypse Now as my movie because it's.
Oh my God, we're thinking about this. I would be like, if I was watching Apocalypse Now right before I died, I'd be like, you know what? I don't think I can even take the next 22 hours. Like,
I know. And hear me out. I really love this movie because it's about a specific period of American history I find really interesting. It's got a lot of my favorite music in it. And I think it's got one of the best Marlon Brando performances ever in his career, and I love him as an actor. He's become one of my favorite actors. He never was until like I believe relatively recently. So all of those things sort of came together because there wasn't anywhere else on my list where I had something that was specifically an American historical period piece or anything like that. So I chose that as the movie because it's one of my favorites, and I love Coppola's directions too. So yeah, it's a wonderful movie.
I have, and I did this in a rewind, I have always gone to that as my favorite example for me of a movie that I think is excellent and I don't like.
Oh, really?
In order to discuss the fact that those are different things, that like you're liking a thing and your taste and whether you think a thing is effective are different things, and that's not a movie that you watch because you want to be entertained.
Yeah, that's right.
Not really. I mean, maybe Dan does, not me. I didn't find that film entertaining. I found it really disturbing, and I finished it and I was like, I couldn't sleep the night after I watched it, and I recognized how wonderful it was, but I never wanted to see it again.
Yeah, the thing I like about that movie and the novel too is just a lot of the themes running through it, but a lot of the questions it asks about humanity I think are really interesting, especially in that context.
Didn't Watchmen rip that off?
Did it?
Because I want to say that that Apocalypse Now did the Rite of the Valkyries thing when the helicopter is coming down and gunning people down, and they're playing something through the speakers, and I think it was Rite of the Valkyries, and then Watchmen comes in and does the same thing, and of course it's also Vietnam.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I remember watching Watchmen going, this looks cool and sounds great, and I mean is a good choice unless you've seen that, and then you know that they just ripped it off. I love that movie, but They ripped that off. Okay, so let's go on now to Boy, that's an interesting choice. I love doing this kind of thing with somebody like Dan, who I have a lot of respect for, and we have a lot in common, but we are decisively different people. So, a television episode. I chose, and this one was harder than other things. I couldn't get away from Star Trek. And I chose a Deep Space Nine episode that I love. This is actually my favorite Deep Space Nine episode, called The Visitor. And this is a case where it was somewhat about mortality that kind of spurred me. And I also thought about The Inner Light, which is a TNG episode. That's on my list of things I'm going to make you watch from TNG, Dan. The Inner Light. The Inner Light was an episode where Picard lives an entire lifetime on another planet inside his own head in like 20 minutes, and it's a lot of people's favorite episode, and it's a really personal, kind of gut-wrenching sort of episode. The Visitor has that too, and it's about it's another somebody living their whole life kind of episode, and it's about Sisko's son, Jake Sisko, who loses his father. But and I'm a sucker for father-son stories. That's the other thing. Which is one of the reasons I love Field of Dreams. And Field of Dreams was a contender on my movie spot. Everybody knows I love that movie, but everybody knows I love the Lego Movie too. So this is not surprising to anybody. But if you ever heard me talk about this episode, you've got. You got Jake Sisko, who seems to lose his father through this temporal anomaly, and he disappears, and he's unable to move on because there's no body and there's no closure, and his body and then Sisko keeps showing up as he'll pop up and then he'll disappear again. So his son knows that he's still alive, but on this kind of weird limbo. And so he ends up spending his entire life, and the thing goes all the way till he's an old man. And he spends his whole life trying to figure out a way to bring his father back to him, and to be able to live on our mortal plane again. But the point of the episode is that he's not living his life while that's happening, and every time Sisko sees him, Sisko keeps telling him to not worry about him and to live his life. And the guy, he's a writer, and he becomes this. And that's the other thing that really gets me about that episode, is that it's about a guy who writes. It's about a guy who looks at the world like a writer, and he has this really successful novel published, and then his father comes back, and so he starts thinking about that again, and his dad's all proud of him, but he's like, don't try to bring me back, just live your life. And it's a super sad episode because he gets married, and he has this wonderful wife, but then she ends up having to leave him because he becomes obsessed with bringing his dad back, and he won't live his life. And so that's a thing that right before you die would be sort of sad, but it has a really happy ending. And if I felt like when I was about to die I had a life that was well lived, I think I would really enjoy watching that one more time.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So, cool. Anyway, that was my pick. Was this a tough one for you, Dan?
Not particularly. I may have talked about this a little bit before, but I wanted to go with an episode of television that would stand on its own, because I considered picking an episode of something like House of Cards or something like that, but that's chapters of a novel, so you wouldn't want to watch one of them without consuming the rest of it, you know what I mean? And a lot of TV shows get arcy like that, all of my favorite shows anyway. So I ended up choosing an episode of The Twilight Zone because I think that's my favorite episodic television show and one of my favorite shows in general, and it's science fiction. I wasn't able to fit science fiction anything in any other parts of my list. So I chose my favorite episode of The Twilight Zone, which is The Obsolete Man. We talked about this a little bit before on a live show.
That's my favorite too, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great episode. For those who don't know, basically what happens is there's a totalitarian state that outlaws books, so therefore the state decides that librarians are obsolete people and all of them must be rounded up and killed. So there's a librarian who goes on trial at the beginning of the episode. The state condemns that he's obsolete, and he's taken to a room where he's waiting to be executed with a member of the party that supports the government, and the party member at first kind of reviles him because the state tells him that these are bad people and are poisoning the well, making people too smart, and things like that. It's not framed that way, but that's the connotation. And the librarian just has a conversation with him. It's a very slow-moving episode, but the dialogue's very good, and it's very engaging. And at the end of the episode, the party member sees the error of his ways, that the censorship is not the way to have a better society. And I won't spoil it because the ending of it, because I'd like people to watch for themselves. But it's a really good episode. If you like, the Twilight Zone kind of just science fiction in the sense that it's a spin on reality and it's an alternate universe kind of thing. A lot of those episodes are cool because they ask a what if question, and I liked this question a lot, which is intrigued me. I think with a lot of Twilight Zone episodes, people like them. Obviously, there's a quality of the writing involved, but a lot of people I feel like are intrigued by the what if question that the episode asks. Like, what if this part of reality was slightly tweaked? And this was the one that interested me the most out of all the episodes I've seen. So that's what I would choose for my episode of television for sure.
Dan, we move on now to books, and the book that I chose was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because once again, I'm part of this is me wanting to kind of have like a second childhood in my 24 hours, like as much as I can, and there's some of that and some of not that. But I think, and again, I kept putting this in the context of what it would be like to do this, to actually pick things right before you die. The thing about Hitchhiker is, it's of course this super absurd, unrealistic, crazy sci-fi farce thing that looks at things in incredibly bizarre and interesting ways. And one of the things that it deals with and talks about a lot is mortality and death, and it makes light of that constantly. And that's what I want to do just before I go. I want to be able to find the levity in it, and that's part of the reason that I picked Hitchhiker, and also because once again, it's one of my favorite things and something I haven't read cover to cover in probably 10 years. So if this was going to happen tomorrow, I'd want to make sure and read Hitchhiker one more time. I like the audiobook more than the actual book, but there's a lot of, like, as far as like structurally and just as a story, the book is much. It's a story, but it's much less of telling a story and much more of having kind of a cookie-cutter framework to have a lot of elaborate jokes and amusing, out-there sci-fi philosophical discussions about things. And it just keeps interrupting itself, which you'll notice that in some of my writing, and even with me talking on camera quite a bit.
That's you, yeah.
So I have a lot in, and I think some of my sensibilities line up with Douglas Adams, and I think I have some stuff in common with him, but also I think I was hugely influenced by him because I was looking at Hitchhiker when I was in junior high. I think was when I first came across that, and so anyway, it would be difficult not to go back to that thing.
Oh yeah, and I think his sense of humor, from what you said, sounds like similar to the kind of stuff that you like. So
I mean, everybody that's read my novel and knows Douglas Adams has said, "Oh, it's kind of like Douglas Adams." I wasn't trying to rip the man off, but that was a giant influence, and like, not to toot my own horn, but people that have read that and liked it have told me that that in kind of like a good way, where it's like, oh, it reminded me of that guy, not like, oh, you're doing that guy, But anyway, what do you and mine's a little bit more character driven, but I think anyway, and now I'm comparing myself to my favorite writer.
Well, I'll follow the trend.
In the words of, I'm going to say this, in the words of the Tick, faux pas. Go ahead, Dan.
I picked a book from my favorite writer, and this is my favorite novel of all time, which is 1984.
1984. Boy, I mean, dude, I would shoot myself in the head like 2 entries into your list.
Well, see, that's the thing. Like, if I was going to go, like,
this is why I did not go that direction.
I have to confront the sadness and to be able to deal with it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think I'd be able to pacify myself with happy things and actually, like, feel happy. I don't know.
Wow.
That's the way I was sort of thinking about it.
See, I totally would. Yeah, I'd be. That's interesting. I mean, I would be just totally different. Yeah.
Like you said, I mean, we have 2 different ways of looking at it, which is interesting.
Yeah, it is.
So I picked 1984 because I loved everything about that book. George Orwell was almost prophetic in the way that he saw the 20th century and the way that like, the world was heading politically, and the way regimes were trying to control people's lives and things like that. This is a man that fought in the Spanish Civil War and saw, these sort of political movements happening firsthand. So he had a lot of firsthand experience, like just examining the ideology of these groups, and sort of just took them to the most horrible extreme in every way possible. And the book is supremely fascinating just because of the world that he creates and some of the observations he makes about that world and how they are dark shadows of our world. That's one of the things I love about science fiction, and this is science fiction in sort of it's called a science fiction book in that it's set in the future. But if you read it today, it doesn't read like science fiction because a lot of the things that they have in that book exist today. So it almost reads like, something that takes place today. They just got the year wrong. So it's science fiction in the sense that he takes something about reality and changes it, and it extrapolates, and it provides commentary about our world from a different context, which is the thing I love about science fiction. It's wonderful.
Me too.
And I just think this is the novel that I've read that had the most profound effect on me when I read it for the first time. And every time I read it, it always gets my mind going and thinking about something new, and not even necessarily about politics or anything like that. I mean, that's a passion of mine, but it just gets my mind moving, and I want to occupy my mind with something if this was the last 24 hours. So wow. I thought that would be a good stimulating thing, and I love that book.
See, I've never reread it because I'm almost half afraid of it now. Like when I read it in high school, it was disturbing, and you could see some of the things that were happening. And looking at it now, even more so. I mean, not to get too political or to criticize society too much. Although I think that's a thing that we kind of inherently end up doing here sometimes, Dan. When we're reviewing some modern things, it's hard not to criticize the culture when you criticize things that you don't think are working. But anyway, 1984. I mean, Orwell nails degeneration in language.
He does. Newspeak is in a lot of I just see Newspeak being used every day in my life, and it's scary.
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean that it's all of that stuff, but it's. I mean, you see, and that's the thing is, when I was in high school, that went over my head a little bit. And we didn't have it, and you needed internet culture before that happened.
I think you need some distance from education, being out of school for a while, to recognize those sorts of things too.
Sure, but I also think in the last 15, 20 years that more of it has come true.
Yeah, I think so too. You're right.
But anyway,
it's at least become more widespread and I don't know what the word is that I was looking for. But anyway, 1984 is wonderful.
If you pick Dan, that's one of my favorite books too. I just, like I said, I'm a little bit. I read last year for a yearbook with Manos, Animal Farm. I finally read it. I had seen the movie, but it's brilliant. Anyway, I won't talk about that again because I've done my bit on that.
It's kind of like an abridged version of 1984, and it's much more allegorical. Obviously,
it's more allegorical, and I think it tackles fascism more specifically.
And, than 1984 does. Orwell intended it to be not just fascism, because he saw there's obvious parallels between the cabal that formed the Soviet Union as well.
Right. Yeah.
So it was just sort of showing that a lot of these new ideologies that were coming up in the 20th century were just
I say fascism. It was more communism, really. Yeah.
That's what they were.
Anyway, all right, so we move on now to comics. Comics and graphic novels trades. I opened that up, whatever you thought you would have enough time to read, I guess. I mean, you're not going to get through an entire run when you're doing all this other stuff. I look at these sorts of things very practically because I think it's interesting, where I'm like...
Same thing, yeah.
Yeah, I was between a lot of things. Once again, I thought of when I was a kid, or at least I was between a lot of things until I finally said, you know what, I'm just going to write the first thing that comes to mind, like I said, thinking about if this actually happened to me. And the first thing I wrote down was Marvels.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's a good book.
What's great about Marvel's, at least, I mean, for a thing like this is, and I guess actually with Lego Movie, I technically get sort of a Batman thing and a Marvel thing in here, but sort of, although that Batman is not Batman, but
That's right. Yeah.
but Marvel's gives you the entirety of the Marvel universe and in its classic Silver Age aesthetic.
That's what I love about it, yeah.
And that's a thing that I would love to experience again, but also there's so much humanity in that book, and it gets at the heart of what heroism is, and looking at it from the street level instead of actually being in the minds of people. And once again, in a very positive way, it's in kind of optimistic way, it's a thing that is dealing with mortality, because it's not about any of these gods as much as it is about a person writing about them. And so you put yourself in the shoes of this everyman that that's your lens into that universe, and at any time you could be looking at all this and something could happen to you, but it's fascinating to look at on the street level. And so you think about your own, like, while I was reading it the first time, and that was a profound experience for me the first time I read it. It was Watchmen profound, and I didn't pick Watchmen partly just because I didn't want to pick super depressing things like Dan did, and so I thought about doing that, and I could have made a case for it, but you read that book and you're thinking about your own significance or lack thereof in the world at large. And once again, if I felt like I had lived a life worth living, that would be a book that I would want to read. Some of my things, I feel like if I felt like I had lived a life that was not well lived, that I would be kind of depressed looking at them, because I would be like, oh, this is about how you still have time left to make the world a better place, and I don't.
Yeah.
All right, what was I'm fascinated to hear this and to see if it's not just Stanley Spider-Man.
Well, I considered picking that, but then I thought practically like you. I was like, well, I could pick the Lee and Ditko omnibus, but like that stuff's really good. But the book, starts to hit stride like halfway through that, and I don't know if I'd be able to go through all those comics in 24 hours. So I was like, well, I'm gonna pick this like a self-contained story, and I didn't end up picking the Spider-Man thing, because Spider-Man comics are defined by the run, right? Like, there are good runs on Spider-Man, and there are good singular stories, but the profoundness and evolution of the character comes from the long-running story. And
although I could have seen you picking Kraven's Last Hunt, especially with all the super depressing stuff you picked. I could have seen that, because that stands on its own.
I almost picked that too, but I ended up going with the I thought about the most self-contained comic book story that hit me the most profoundly the first time I read it, and every time I read it, and that's Daredevil Born Again. That's like my favorite self-contained kind of story that I've ever read in comics before. It just sort of defined for me everything that I love about Daredevil as a character and relate to him because that was a story where the Catholicism angle was introduced, and I was raised Catholic, so I profoundly relate to the Catholic guilt that character has, and I loved that book because it was all about the contradiction that is in Matt Murdock's character, and ultimately a contradiction that's in all of us. Like, Matt Murdock is a vigilante he's a lawyer by day and believes in the rule of law, but is also a vigilante and believes that the law doesn't go far enough. And Frank Miller talks about that in interviews. He said that, like, this is a fun contradiction, but it's a contradiction and it needs to be destroyed and examined before it makes any sort of sense.
Of course, yeah.
And I love that deconstruction of the character, and the great thing about that story is that it's super depressing when you're reading it through, but by the end, the inspiring thing about it is, even though Matt Murdock is destroyed and living on the street as a homeless person, he still triumphs and is happy by the end of the story. Like, the great thing about Born Again is I don't think you need more Daredevil stories after that book's over. Like, Matt Murdock doesn't really need to be Daredevil anymore. The purpose for him being a vigilante doesn't really exist anymore. He's happy. He's with Karen Page. His life is intact. That should be, like, if they do a Daredevil.
Yeah, the only motivation is a commercial one.
Exactly, and that's it's not as much of an inherent problem with Daredevil as it is with Spider-Man, where that character needs to end at some point by the necessity of what kind of story it is. Someone just told the best of the last Daredevil story possible, and
On the other hand, though, I've thought about this a lot, because one of the things you bring up all the time with Spider-Man is that's a character that was not created to go on forever. That's a coming-of-age story, and at some point it ends. Even if you told his whole life, at some point that story ends, because Stan Lee, what he brought to comics was basically novel writing. He basically tried to make comics more literary. I would make the case that almost none of those characters were created to go on forever, necessarily.
That's true, yeah. Obviously, some of them,
because they're not stagnant. I mean, they change and grow, and how many of those big life lessons can you learn before you have to backtrack a character in order to tell stories? And we've learned that that's very difficult to do in 60 years of comic writing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there is a case to be made for characters maybe like Captain America, who his whole thing is he struggles with changing, but ultimately doesn't, because he's such an upstanding human being.
And you can thaw him out in any era, but then something you got to keep in mind, of course, is he was not. I mean, the modern Captain America in being thawed out and being in present day was Stan Lee and those guys, but he wasn't a character invented by them, and the whole point of him was that he wasn't supposed to change, and most of those characters in the Golden Age were that way. And then when Stan Lee gets a hold of them, obviously they're doing more interesting character stuff with it, but they're still trying to keep it true to what it was. So he's kind of the exception that proves the rule in a way.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's maybe we should do a video.
There's a GNN on that. I think we might have just made it, but we can elaborate on it. Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I love about that story so much, and that's the one comic book story, self-contained, that I can say that I probably want to read before I die, because it's really good.
Wow. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, but I loved what you had to say about it. The video game that I chose is a thing that will not surprise you at all. I went with the first Sonic the Hedgehog.
Oh yeah, it's a great game. And you love Sonic, so I'm not surprised either.
Yeah, and that was the video game. I mean, I was already playing Mario before that and stuff, and I mean, you got to remember that I'm old enough that those were new when I was kind of the age that they were aimed at, or just a little bit younger than the age that they were aimed at. And so I played Sonic 1 probably a year after it came out, the first time I played it. And I remember that, and this might sound silly, it being a video game, but I remember it just changing me. I remember playing that game and it just being an experience unlike anything I'd had before, and not just that it moves fast and the kind of thing it is, in that when you first look at Sonic and you've never played it before, it looks like it plays itself. You're like, what do you do? You look like you're invincible. This doesn't look like a challenge. Like anybody that knows what they're doing, that's playing Sonic, and you watch just a couple minutes of it and they don't die, it looks like a pinball machine or something. It looks like not a pinball machine. It looks like a Rube Goldberg machine. It's like it plays itself, and then you actually sit down and you play it and you go, oh, holy crap. It's challenging, and there's multiple paths, and you have choices to make, and but also the aesthetic and its immense sense of style, and the music especially was just a really big deal. And the guy that composed the music for that was a big, I think pop guy in Japan, and he never gets any credit for that, but his music is incredible. And of course, Marble Zone is my favorite video game music of all time, and I can't stop using it in videos that have nothing to do with Sonic the Hedgehog because I'm self-indulgent. But yeah, I had a really profound experience playing that when I was a kid, and I feel like it's one of those things that that's kind of fundamental to my chemical makeup, which probably sounds dumb to old people that didn't grow up with older people than me that didn't grow up with video games. But different generations have their own thing, and That was one of
ours. I mean, I
ours.
can't imagine my life without video games, certainly either, you know?
Yeah.
Video games are the best.
I used to be one of the outliers that would, maybe not outliers in the geek culture that made a big case for video games aren't really an art form, and that was because when people would talk about video games as an art form, it was always kind of just an assumption that we were talking about a narrative art form, but Sonic makes a really good case for video games as an art form. I'm playing, I've been wanting to play this forever. I'm finally playing a Little Big Planet, and you want a game that's art? Holy crap!
Yeah, I've heard those games are really good.
It's like the aesthetic and the style of that thing is unlike anything I've ever seen.
Yeah, and it's a game that almost lets you create art yourself by,
it does.
You can control the level design.
Yeah, and I haven't done that yet. I've just been playing through the story mode, but like, boy, the blend of cultures and stuff in that game. I'm playing some levels right now. I'm playing Little Big Planet 3. I'm playing through some levels right now that are. I'm only bringing this up because I'm having a somewhat similar experience with it, kind of that I did with Sonic. I'm playing through these levels right now that are like 1950s inspired, and it's using actual popular music from that time period.
Oh, cool.
And it just gives it this entirely different atmosphere. Yeah, but anyway, I'll do a recommends or something on that. Well, I'll probably do some platforming out on that at some point. Yeah. But, yeah. Okay, Dan, this is going to be interesting. I'm going to be really surprised if you didn't pick a Zelda, but then 24 hours, like, how much would you play? So I don't know. What'd you pick?
I did pick a Zelda game.
Oh, you did? Okay.
And I picked... I was stuck between two games, because my two favorite Zelda games of all time are Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. And I ended up going with Majora's Mask because, while Ocarina of Time is kind of like the consummate, like, iconic Zelda game, the stakes really high, you're saving Hyrule from the evil wizard GNN, like, that's kind of the formula for all Zelda games. The thing that I always loved about Majora's Mask was that it was so different from the rest of them, and that it was like this sort of somber journey through an alien and strange place, because Majora's Mask, for those who don't know, takes place in Termina, which is a place we've never seen in any of the other Zelda games. There's a lot of theories that this is like Link stuck in purgatory, but it's never said in the game explicitly. But basically, the game, what it's about is there's this big moon that's about to crash and destroy all like Termina and the people living in it, and you have 3 days before the moon is about to hit the Earth, and you travel through time trying to put events into place to stop that from happening. And throughout the course of the game, you meet all of the townspeople, you get to know them. If you do all the side quests, you become really invested in the relationships that you have with these people in the community. Like, one of the side quests, you help these two people that are lovers. One of them got cursed and is stuck in the body of a child, and you have to help them, like, get married and things like that. It's a really sort of intimate sort of story in that one specific set of side quests. And then the masks that you wear in the game, there's specific ones that transform you into one of the various other races that exist in the Zelda universe, and each of those masks contains the soul of someone that recently died that you get to meet their ghost. And you go around with the masks on and sort of provide these people that recently died with closure in their lives in the various areas that you have the masks on and have to use them. And it's a really interesting story.
Well, you went with the explore the nature of mortality down your list, didn't you?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I did.
I'm glad I didn't exactly do that. Although a lot of mine you can make the case. I'm glad I didn't do that entirely because this is a much more contrasting thing.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, we would have had people slitting their wrists by the time a video was done, and we both chose things like that. But yeah, that's the thing I love about Majora's Mask, and it's ultimately heroic at the end, because Link, if you finish the game, you save Termina from the moon crashing on it. But it's such a somber and moody and atmospheric kind of game. That's what I always loved about it, and they've never made a Zelda game like that again. Like, they made Twilight Princess and it had a dark aesthetic, but it was just kind of Ocarina of Time with a dark coat of paint on it. Like, Majora's Mask is a thematically dark, somber kind of game, or at least as far as Zelda's went in that direction. There's not anything that's like, super, super dark in the Zelda series, because the kids have, it has to be accessible for kids, but it's like the somberness that you would want in an all ages piece of entertainment, and that's what I really, really love about it. It's great stuff.
The last item on the list, and perhaps we should have saved something more super geeky and in our realm for the end thing, but I didn't really think that through. The last thing is an album. And I try to get music in here whenever I can, because we don't talk about music nearly enough on the channel. And now that we've turned Geekvolution into a network of contributors, we've got a show for a lot of different things, and we still don't have a straight-up music show. Well, that's a difficult thing to do
at some point. Yeah,
it's a difficult thing to do on YouTube, of course, but just trying to avoid copyright flags and stuff. But I just thought of that. I'm like, oh, we don't have we even have an action figure show whenever I get around to making it, but we don't we don't have that. Anyway, the album I chose, once again, I wrote down the first thing that came to my mind, and this was an album, I don't have a great deal to say about this, but this is an album that influenced me a lot when I was in high school, and once again, feels to me like it's kind of part of my chemical makeup, and I couldn't get away from the Bare Naked Ladies album Stunt.
Oh, interesting.
And I don't know how familiar you are with that band, but
I've heard what songs they had, mainstream radio played back when they were popular.
Yeah, and that's the reason I bought that album. Of course, that's the album that starts with 1 week. It's actually not, in my mind, one of the even the better songs in the album. It's a good radio track. It always got made fun of for being as kind of by the numbers and pandering as it is, where it's kind of an encapsulation of bubbling 90s culture at the time, and there's this hilarious video. I can't begin to articulate how that decade that song is. There's this hilarious video that somebody put together at one point that I'll have to send you this because it's great. That is a parody of that song and a parody of their video for it, and all of the lyrics they wrote are about what exactly the song is, and it completely breaks that down and deconstructs it on a commercial level. This is what it's selling to, and this is why people bought it, and it's I couldn't believe how articulate it was, and it's hilarious. But anyway, Stunt is a much more sophisticated album on the whole than that song, and it's very contemplative. It comes very much from a personal place from those guys, and you can kind of feel their history informing it. And they were definitely I forget the name of the lead singer and the main writer of that group, but you can tell that it was kind of the formative years of his life, and that he was in that place before when you kind of mellow out in your life, and he's writing about everything under the sun, and and the kinds of stuff that bands are always writing about. He's writing about alcoholism, and he's writing about he's got this great song at the end that's about dreaming and existentialism, and he's just writing about all these different things, but in really kind of like catchy and hummable and memorable songs. But then there's one in particular that I like a lot that's Light Up My Room, and it is it's a much more kind of mellow and introspective song than some of the rest of what's on it, but anyway, it's not a for everybody kind of thing, but it seems to be that album that I go back to a lot. It's like one of the really big ones. Weird that I didn't go with the They Might Be Giants album, but
yeah, I was gonna say I expected you to pick something from them.
Yeah, and I mean the thing is, I think B&L have something to do with why I became such a big Giants fan, because I was into them first, Bare Naked Ladies, and they have some of those quirky sensibilities. The big difference between them, in my humble opinion, is that They Might Be Giants stayed good, and Bare Naked Ladies kind of, in my mind, sold out and started making music that sounds too much like a lot of really crappy things going on right now. Oh, really? In my humble opinion, although I haven't listened to a lot of their new stuff. But anyway, what was your album, Dan?
Well, I'm going to be predictable. I chose my favorite album of all time.
Did you?
My favorite musician of all time is Bob Dylan, for people that don't know it. I love his music. I've listened to the majority of his catalog, which is very long. Not all of it's good, but the stuff that is good is amazing. And in my mind, my favorite album, and I think his best album, is Highway 61 Revisited. This was the first album that most of the songs were electric. Bring It All Back Home, the one that he did right before this, because his best work was all done in a span of like 2-3 years, and he released like 4 albums in that time or something like that. Something crazy. I mean, he was a music producing workhorse back then, and this album's got songs like like a Rolling Stone, Tombstone Blues, Ballad of a Thin Man, just like Tom Thumb's Blues, Desolation Row. I mean, like I love every song on this record. And a lot of the songs are about a lot of different things, but Bob Dylan's music always gets me thinking. That's the kind of music I put on when I just need a quiet moment to think and be with myself and alone time. That's kind of the music I'll put on. So I love Bob Dylan's music for driving. When I'm by myself, I have to drive a long distance to work or something like an hour. That's what I put on, because you got to occupy the time somehow. And I think if you're alone, and your mind's moving, then it feels like a short amount of time. So that's probably what I would pick. I described what some of the songs are about and the themes and stuff, but Bob Dylan's stuff is so notorious, can be so notoriously overanalyzed, because a lot of the lyrics are revered and have been analyzed by people already. So I'm not really going to attempt to do that. But if you've never listened to the album before, it's always ranks on Rolling Stone's like best albums of all time. Like a Rolling Stone is always chosen as like the best rock and roll song of all time. So if you never heard this record before, I'd highly recommend it. Every song on it is gold stuff. It's really, really good.
Well, folks, that's our list, or those are our lists, and I'm hearing myself in my okay. We would, as we said, love to hear from you folks and see what things you would choose for each of these categories. If you found out, sadly, tragically, that your race was almost run and that you have 24 hours left, I feel like Dan's stuff is like really heavy, and my brain would explode before I got to the end. I went for more relaxing stuff mostly.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see if people choose things more like you or me.
We went on
probably
different
like
approaches. Yeah, but I think some people are likely to find things that are even like heavier and more bang your head against the wall kinds of stuff. But anyway, that's going to be it for us today, and I will be back again with another of my compatriots next week for another episode of Geeks Not Nerds. Dan, thanks so much for joining me. Sure appreciate it.
No problem. I love being here. So.
This is always a great time, and we'll see you again next time. I am Admiral Logan.
And I'm Dan, reminding you to support your local comic book store.
Thanks, folks. Oh, I'm going to have to tell everybody else to do that.
That's right.
See you, folks.